The Forgotten Planet. The two violet moons of Nevoria cast their eerie glow across the capital city of Luminar, illuminating the crystal spires that once proudly reached toward the stars. Now those same spires were dulled by a yellowing atmosphere, their surfaces corroded by the toxic particles that had been ravaging the planet for nearly 3 cycles. First Ambassador Tavik stood at the observation deck of the Planetary Council Tower, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he adjusted his breathing apparatus. The clicking and whirring of the device had become a constant companion, an unwelcome reminder of his people's impending doom. Incoming transmission from the Galactic Alliance Council, announced the communications officer, her voice muffled behind her own mask. Tavik straightened his formal robes, composed his expression to hide the desperation he felt, and nodded. Display. The holographic screen materialized, showing the imposing chamber of the Galactic Alliance, a gathering of the 23 most powerful species in the known universe. At the center podium stood High Chancellor Vex Moore of the Ardani, his 6 limbs positioned in the formal stance of official pronouncement. Representatives of Nevoria, the High Chancellor began, his translator converting his clicking speech to standard galactic common. The Alliance has reviewed your petition for emergency intervention regarding your atmospheric degradation crisis. Tavik felt a surge of hope. 3 months of desperate pleas, of sending their best scientific data, of offering rare minerals and ancient Nevorian technologies in exchange for help. Perhaps it had finally worked. After thorough deliberation, Vex Moore continued, the Council has determined that intervention would violate the principle of natural planetary evolution as outlined in Interstellar Accord, Section 42b. The hope died as quickly as it had formed. Tavik's lower eyes narrowed while his upper ones widened in disbelief. Natural evolution. He couldn't stop himself from interrupting. Chancellor, there is nothing natural about the solar flare that damaged our planetary shields. Our scientists have proven that the radiation signature matches weapons testing from the Craxus expanse. Someone's experiments altered our star's behavior. The Chancellor's facial ridges darkened, the Ardani equivalent of a dismissive frown. The evidence was reviewed and found inconclusive. The Council sympathizes with Nevoria's situation, but cannot justify the resource expenditure for what appears to be a natural disaster. Behind the Chancellor, Tavik could see the other representatives. Some avoided looking at the screen, their discomfort evident. Others, like the Zentari delegation, were already engaged in conversation about what appeared to be an entirely different matter. 8 billion lives, and they couldn't be bothered to maintain attention for a 5-minute call. Chancellor, Tavik tried one last time, fighting to keep his voice steady. We have refined quantum crystals, enough to power your fleet for 2 decades. We ask only for atmospheric processors and temporary shelter for our most vulnerable populations. The Council's decision is final, Vex Moore replied. We can offer to evacuate up to 10,000 of your scientific and cultural elite to preserve Nevorian knowledge. An observer team will be dispatched to document the atmospheric collapse for future research purposes. Observers. They would send observers to watch as his people choked and died. You would come to document our extinction, but not prevent it. Tavik felt his professional facade cracking. Is this the compassion of your advanced civilizations? Several council members shifted uncomfortably, but Vex Moore remained impassive. The offer stands for 14 standard days. The council wishes the people of Nevoria peace in this difficult transition. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Tavik staring at empty space where the hope for his world's survival had just been extinguished. First Ambassador. The communications officer's voice was small, afraid. What do we tell the Planetary Council? Tavik turned to look out at his dying world once more. In the distance, the atmospheric processing plants they'd hastily constructed were working at maximum capacity, a futile effort, like trying to drain an ocean with a drinking cup. Tell them, he began, but was interrupted by an urgent alert tone. Sir, the sensor officer's voice crackled over the intercom. We're detecting multiple unidentified vessels entering the system. They're not broadcasting Alliance identification codes. Tavik felt a chill. Had the situation escalated from abandonment to active threat? Origin: unknown, sir, but they're on a direct course for Nevoria. And they're moving fast. Defensive protocols. Tavik ordered automatically, though Nevoria's defense systems were minimal at best. Their civilization had focused on science and art for millennia, relying on Alliance protection that had now abandoned them. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel. The screen flickered again, and this time a completely unfamiliar being appeared. Bilateral symmetry, pinkish-tan exterior tissue, patches of dark fur on the top of the head. The being wore what looked like a practical but outdated environmental suit with visible seams and mechanical components. Nevorian control, this is Captain Elena Reyes of the Earth vessel Horizon. We're leading a humanitarian mission with 14 vessels carrying atmospheric processing equipment, medical supplies, and evacuation capacity. Requesting permission to enter orbit and deploy assistance teams. Tavik blinked all 4 eyes simultaneously, a rare expression of complete shock among his kind. Earth? I'm not familiar with your species or your world. The being, Captain Reyes, made a facial gesture, pulling back the outer covering of her mouth to display bone-white eating structures. Tavik's xenobiology training identified this as a smile, a friendly expression in some bipedal species. We're relatively new to the galactic community, Ambassador. Humans from Earth. We only established our first extraplanetary colony 20 years ago. And you've come to help us. Tavik couldn't keep the confusion from his voice. How did you learn of our situation? One of our trade vessels was passing through a neighboring system when they intercepted your emergency broadcasts. We don't have a seat on the Alliance Council yet, but when we heard what was happening, she shrugged, a gesture Tavik didn't fully understand. Humans don't sit by while people suffer, not when we can do something about it. But the resources required, Tavik began, will be significant, Captain Rice acknowledged. But we've faced environmental crises on our own world. We've developed some effective, if not elegant, solutions. They might not be as advanced as Alliance technology, but they work. Tavik looked at his staff, saw the same cautious hope on their faces that he felt stirring in his own chest. Captain Rise of Earth, he said formally, on behalf of the 8 billion citizens of Nevoria, I welcome your assistance with profound gratitude. Within hours, the Earth vessels had established orbit around Nevoria. Tavik stood at the main landing port with Governor Silara and Chief Scientist Mox as the first human shuttle descended through the toxic atmosphere. The craft was bulkier than Alliance vessels, with visible weld marks and what appeared to be repurposed components from different technologies. It wasn't sleek or aesthetically pleasing by Nevorian standards, but as it landed successfully despite the turbulent, corrosive air, Tavik found himself appreciating its rugged functionality. The shuttle's door opened with a mechanical hiss, and a team of humans emerged wearing environmental suits that looked almost primitive compared to the molecular thin protection fields used by Alliance species. Yet they moved confidently, carrying equipment and setting up monitoring stations with practiced efficiency. Captain Rice approached, removing her helmet with a pressurized click. Her face showed signs of strain from Nevoria's higher gravity, but her expression remained determined. Ambassador Tavik, I'm Elena Reyes. This is Dr. Marcus Chen, our Chief Environmental Engineer, and Commander Darius Jackson, Operations Coordinator. The humans extended their upper limbs, and Tavik recalled this was their greeting custom. He carefully mimicked the gesture, grasping Captain Reyes' hand. Your arrival is unexpected, but most welcome, Tavik said. Though I must ask, why would you commit such resources to a world you've never known? Captain Reyes exchanged glances with her colleagues before answering. Ambassador, humanity nearly destroyed our own world before we learned better. We poisoned our air, warmed our climate to dangerous levels, and came close to ecological collapse. We developed these technologies because we had to save ourselves. She gestured to the equipment being unloaded. Now that we've joined the galactic community, and found others facing similar challenges. Well, how could we not help? Dr. Chen stepped forward, activating a holographic display that showed Navoria's atmospheric composition. Your situation is severe, but not beyond hope. We've developed nanocatalytic converters that can process toxins at the molecular level. They're not as elegant as some Alliance tech, but they're robust and can be mass-produced quickly. As Tavik watched the humans efficiently organizing their operation, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. But a troubling question remained. Captain, the Alliance Council explicitly refused intervention. Are you not concerned about diplomatic repercussions? Commander Jackson gave a sound that Tavik's translator identified as a snort of derision. The Alliance declined to help a dying civilization because it wasn't convenient. If that's their idea of galactic leadership, then perhaps it's time for some new perspectives. We're not here to start interstellar incidents, Captain Rice added more diplomatically. We're here to save lives. Politics can sort itself out afterward. As the humans continued their work, setting up equipment and coordinating with Navorian scientists, word of their arrival spread quickly through Luminar. Citizens gathered at the edges of the landing zone, watching with all four eyes wide. Children, who had been confined to sealed habitats for months, pressed against viewports to catch glimpses of the strange visitors who had come when all others had turned away. That evening, as the first atmospheric processors roared to life, Tavik stood with Captain Rice watching the machines pull toxic gases from the air, process them, and release clean oxygen. It will take time, Rice said, studying the readings. But our projections show significant improvement within 3 months. Your people developed impressive filtration systems with limited resources. If we combine your designs with our catalytic technology, we might accelerate the process. Captain, Tavik said, his voice thick with emotion. I must understand. Your species is barely known in the galaxy. You have your own worlds, your own challenges. Why would you extend such effort for strangers? Elena Reyes looked out at the horizon, where the toxic yellow haze was already slightly thinner around the processors. On Earth, we have a saying, no one is truly a stranger in times of need. She turned to face him. The stars might have turned their backs on Navoria, Ambassador, but humans never abandon a friend. We only just met, Tavik observed. Rice smiled that curious human expression again. Then we're getting a head start on a long friendship. As night fell on Navoria, bringing the glow of its twin moons through slightly clearer skies, word spread from city to city, from shelter to shelter. Help had come from the most unexpected place. A young species called humans had arrived, not to observe their extinction, but to prevent it. For the first time in months, the people of Navoria slept with hope for tomorrow. Operation Salvation. Dawn broke over Luminar City, the first rays of Navoria's sun filtering through a sky that was marginally clearer than the day before. It wasn't a dramatic change. The atmosphere still carried its toxic yellow hue, but the sensors didn't lie. The human atmospheric processors had removed 2.3% of the harmful particles in just 12 hours of operation. In the hastily established Joint Command Center, First Ambassador Tavik observed the controlled chaos of the human operation with fascination. They called it Operation Salvation, a name that would have seemed presumptuous if not for the fierce determination they brought to every task. Dr. Marcus Chen stood at the central holographic display with Chief Scientist Mox, their anatomies starkly different, but their scientific focus identical. Chen pointed to a mountainous region on the western continent. If we position the next cluster of processors here, at this altitude, we can create a cascading effect, Chen explained. The prevailing wind patterns will carry the cleansed air across the largest population centers. Mox's four eyes blinked in rapid sequence, a sign of excitement in Navorian body language. Fascinating approach. Our models focused on city-by-city purification, but your atmospheric circulation strategy could multiply efficiency by a factor of 3. Tavik stepped closer. How soon can these additional processors be deployed? Commander Jackson consulted his tablet. The Resilience and New Horizon are converting their cargo bays now. We should have 20 more units ready within 36 hours. That's not fast enough, came a new voice from the doorway. Captain Rice entered, looking like she hadn't slept. Reports from the eastern settlements show accelerated degradation. The toxin concentration is increasing there faster than our models predicted. Jackson frowned. We're working at maximum capacity, Captain. The fabrication units can only process so much material at once. Then we need more materials and more fabrication units, Rice said firmly. Tavik exchanged glances with Governor Solara, who had been quietly observing the humans' operation. Captain, the governor said, we have manufacturing facilities in the Southern District. They're designed for crystalline technologies, but perhaps they could be adapted. Dr. Chen's eyes lit up. If we could integrate your crystal technology with our catalytic systems. He turned to Mox. Are your engineers familiar with molecular reconfiguration techniques? It's the foundation of our technological development, Mox replied. We've applied it primarily to information storage and art, but the principles are transferable. Show me, Chen said, already gathering his equipment. As the scientist hurried off, Tavik found himself standing beside Captain Rice, who was studying the atmospheric projections with a furrowed brow. You push yourself too hard, Captain, Tavik observed. Your species requires more rest than ours, does it not? Rice gave a small laugh. We do, but we're also stubborn. I'll sleep when the air doesn't poison children. A noble sentiment, but ineffective if you collapse from exhaustion, Tavik countered. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from the communication station. Captain Rice, Ambassador Tavik, called the human communications officer. We're receiving a transmission from an Alliance vessel entering the system. The main screen activated to show a sleek, silver ship, unmistakably of Ardani design, approaching Nevoria. This is Observer Vessel Celestial Witness to Unidentified Earth Vessels, came the translated voice of an Ardani officer. You are operating in restricted space without Alliance authorization. State your purpose immediately. Reyes stepped forward. This is Captain Elena Reyes of the Earth Humanitarian Fleet. We're conducting emergency atmospheric restoration at the request of the Nevorian government. There was a pause before the response came. Earth vessels. The Alliance Council has determined that intervention in Nevoria's natural planetary evolution violates Interstellar Accord Section 42B. You are ordered to cease operations and withdraw from the system. Tavik felt a cold dread spreading through him. After a glimmer of hope, would they now be abandoned again? To his surprise, Captain Rice smiled, not the friendly expression he had seen before, but something sharper, more determined. Observer Vessel Celestial Witness, she replied calmly. Earth acknowledges your message. However, as Earth is not yet a full member of the Alliance, we are not bound by Section 42B. We are operating under Earth Emergency Response Protocol 7, providing humanitarian aid at the request of a sovereign government. This is unacceptable, the Ardani officer insisted. The Council has ruled. The Council ruled not to help, Rise interrupted. They did not forbid others from helping. Unless you can cite the specific provision that prohibits independent humanitarian action, we will continue our mission. The screen went blank as the Ardani cut the transmission. That won't be the end of it, Commander Jackson warned. No, Rise agreed, but it buys us time. And time is what we need most right now. The following days brought a flurry of activity as human and Nevorian scientists and engineers worked together to integrate their technologies. The combination proved more effective than either had imagined. Nevorian crystal matrices, when reconfigured to human specifications, amplified the catalytic effect of the processors by 340%. Across Nevoria, hope began to rise with each slightly clearer dawn. In Luminar City, children were allowed outside their sealed habitats for brief periods in less affected areas. Hospitals reported fewer new cases of respiratory distress. But political pressure mounted as rapidly as the technological progress. 3 more Alliance observer vessels arrived in orbit, maintaining position just outside Navorian space, but clearly monitoring all activity. Diplomatic channels buzzed with formal protests from the Ardani and several other Council species. 7 days into Operation Salvation, Tavik found Captain Reyes in the viewing garden of the Council Tower, one of the few places where the improvement in air quality was immediately visible as the crystal flowers had begun to regain some of their luminescence. "Your Earth Diplomatic Corps must be very busy," Tavik commented. Reyes nodded, looking tired but satisfied. 26 formal protests so far. Our ambassadors are working overtime, but public opinion is shifting in our favor. Several Alliance member worlds have begun questioning the Council's decision, especially after we released the atmospheric data. "You've risked much for us," Tavik said quietly. "Worth it," Reyes replied simply. She gestured to a group of Navorian children who were being allowed to play in the garden for the first time in months, their breathing apparatus lighter and less restrictive than before. "This is why we came." Their contemplation was interrupted by Dr. Chen and Mox, who burst into the garden with uncharacteristic excitement. "We've done it," Chen exclaimed. "The crystalline catalyst reconfiguration worked beyond our projections." Mox's skin had taken on the purple flush of Navorian elation. "The new processors are functioning at 827% efficiency compared to our original designs. At this rate, we could restore atmospheric stability within 45 days, rather than the projected 6 months. That's..." Reyes began, but was cut off by a priority alert from her communicator. "Captain," came Commander Jackson's urgent voice, "the Alliance observer vessels are moving into Navorian orbit. They're demanding we cease operations immediately or face consequences." Reyes's expression hardened. "On my way." She turned to Tavik. "Ambassador, I need to speak with your planetary council immediately. The situation has escalated." Within the hour, Tavik stood with Captain Reyes before the full Navorian Planetary Council as she outlined the situation. 3 Ardani cruisers and 2 Zentari support vessels have taken position around your world, Reyes explained. "They claim they're here to prevent unauthorized intervention in natural processes, but in reality they're attempting to force our withdrawal." Governor Solara's facial membranes pulsed with concern. "Would they actually attack a humanitarian mission?" "I don't believe so," Reyes said. "That would violate too many of their own principles. But they could blockade supply ships, interfere with our communications, or apply other pressure tactics." "What do you propose, Captain?" asked Elder Counselor Vin, the oldest member of Navoria's leadership. "We need to make this too public, too visible for them to stop without looking like villains," Reyes said bluntly. "Dr. Chen and Chief Scientist Mox have created something revolutionary, a combination of human and Navorian technology that's exponentially more effective than either alone." She activated a holographic display showing their new hybrid processor design. "If we can demonstrate this technology working on a continental scale, broadcast the results to every world in the Alliance, they won't be able to justify stopping us. Public opinion would turn against them completely." "A bold strategy," Tavik observed. "But can we deploy enough processors quickly enough?" "That's where we need your help," Reyes explained. "We've modified the design to be manufactured using primarily Navorian components. If you can repurpose every available manufacturing facility on the planet, we could produce enough units within 3 days to begin large-scale atmospheric restoration." The council chamber erupted in discussion, but Elder Vin raised his hand for silence. "You ask us to commit our remaining industrial capacity to this effort," he said slowly. "If it fails, we will have expended resources we cannot replace. And if it succeeds," Reyes countered, "your people will breathe clean air again. Your world will live." The silence that followed was broken by a small commotion at the chamber doors. A group of Navorian children entered, led by their teachers. They had brought crystal artworks, traditional symbols of gratitude in Navorian culture, crafted for their human saviors. As the children presented their gifts to the startled human delegation, Elder Vin's 4 eyes blinked slowly in sequence. "It seems the youngest among us have made their choice clear," he said. "Very well. Captain Rise, Nevoria commits its full industrial capacity to your plan. Let us show the Alliance what cooperation truly means." Across Nevoria, every manufacturing facility shifted to produce the hybrid processors. Humans worked alongside Nevorians, teaching and learning, combining their knowledge in ways neither had imagined possible. Despite the Alliance vessels looming in orbit, a sense of shared purpose united the two species. 3 days later, the first continent scale test began. 1,000 hybrid processors activated simultaneously across the western continent, their crystalline components glowing with blue-violet light as they pulled toxins from the atmosphere at unprecedented rates. The results were immediate and undeniable. Satellite imagery showed the toxic yellow haze visibly receding, replaced by clearer air that revealed the true colors of Nevoria's landscape for the first time in years. And as promised, the humans broadcast everything. Unfiltered data, before and after imagery, testimonials from Nevorian citizens breathing easier for the first time in cycles. The feeds went to every Alliance world, every independent system, and every trade hub in the sector. As night fell on that momentous day, Captain Rise and Ambassador Tavik stood on the observation deck of the Council Tower, watching the stars become visible over Luminar City for the first time in nearly 3 cycles. "The Alliance cruisers are withdrawing to a higher orbit," Rise noted, checking her communicator. "And we've received messages of support from 11 Alliance member worlds. 3 have pledged to send their own assistance vessels." "You've changed everything," Tavik said quietly. "Not just our atmosphere, but perhaps the very structure of galactic politics." Ray smiled, looking up as one of Nevoria's violet moons emerged from behind dissipating clouds. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal the truth about who we are and what we stand for." "And what does humanity stand for, Captain Reyes?" She considered the question for a moment before answering. "The simple belief that no one should suffer alone when help is possible. That's not unique to humans. It's just that we're stubborn enough to act on it even when it's inconvenient." As they watched the skies continue to clear, notifications began pouring in from across Nevoria. Citizens were stepping outside without heavy breathing apparatus for the first time in months. Hospital admissions for respiratory distress had dropped by 40% in just hours. And in the crystal forests on the northern continent, the ancient trees were beginning to glow again as they absorbed the cleaner air. Operation Salvation was succeeding beyond anyone's expectations, proving that when humanity extended its hand in friendship, the impossible became possible. A new dawn. 6 weeks after the humans' arrival, Nevoria's skies had transformed. The toxic yellow haze that had choked the planet for cycles had receded to isolated pockets in the polar regions, and even those were diminishing daily. The twin violet moons shone clearly again, casting their ethereal glow across landscapes returning to life. In Luminar City's Grand Forum, opened to the sky for the first time since the crisis began, First Ambassador Tavik stood before a gathering unlike any in Nevorian history. Representatives from 17 Alliance worlds sat alongside the full human delegation, with Captain Alina Reyes at the center. Most remarkably, High Chancellor Vexmore himself had arrived from the Ardani homeworld, his formal appearance suggesting this was no ordinary diplomatic visit. "We gather today," Tavik began, his voice carrying across the assembled dignitaries without need for amplification in the restored atmosphere, "to celebrate not just the salvation of Nevoria, but the birth of a new understanding between worlds." He gestured to the human delegation. 6 weeks ago, when the Alliance Council determined that our planetary crisis did not warrant intervention, we prepared for extinction. Then came humanity, a species barely known to us, with no obligation to help, no treaties binding them to our fate. They came simply because they could, because to them, the unnecessary suffering of 8 billion sentient beings was unacceptable. Murmurs passed through the Alliance representatives, some uncomfortable, others approving. The results speak for themselves. Tavik continued, activating a holographic display that showed the dramatic transformation of Navoria's atmosphere. Through the unprecedented cooperation between human and Navorian scientists, we have not only saved this world, but developed new technologies that could protect countless others from similar environmental catastrophes. High Chancellor Vexmore rose, his 6 limbs arranging themselves in the formal posture of official address. The assembly fell silent, anticipating the Alliance's response to what many now viewed as a diplomatic embarrassment. The Alliance Council, Vexmore began, his translator conveying his clicking speech, has observed the developments on Navoria with great interest. While the initial intervention by Earth vessels occurred outside our established protocols. With respect, Chancellor, Captain Rice interrupted, rising to stand beside Tavik. There was nothing in your protocols that prohibited independent humanitarian action. We reviewed them thoroughly before launching our mission. A ripple of surprised murmurs passed through the assembly. Interrupting the High Chancellor was virtually unheard of in Alliance diplomatic circles. Vexmore's facial ridges darkened briefly before he continued. As I was saying, while the initial intervention occurred outside established protocols, the results have been instructive. The Council has voted to formally recognize the Earth-Navorian Environmental Restoration Project and to incorporate its technological innovations into Alliance Emergency Response Doctrine. It was a stunning reversal, the closest the notoriously proud Ardani leader would come to admitting the Council had been wrong. Tavik and Rice exchanged glances, a shared moment of victory after weeks of struggle. But Reyes wasn't finished. Chancellor, she said, her voice respectful but firm, recognition is appreciated, but insufficient. The crisis on Navoria revealed a fundamental flaw in Alliance emergency response policy, one that prioritizes bureaucratic process over saving lives. Earth proposes the establishment of an independent interstellar humanitarian corps that can act quickly when planetary-scale disasters occur, without waiting for Council deliberation. The Chancellor's upper limbs twitched in what Tavik recognized as irritation. Captain Rice, while your species' idealism is admirable, the complexity of interstellar politics requires careful consideration before 8 billion people suffocate. Rice challenged. With respect, Chancellor, careful consideration nearly condemned an entire civilization to extinction. Sometimes the morally correct action is also the urgent one. Governor Silara rose to stand with Tavik and Rice. Navoria supports Earth's proposal. Furthermore, we offer our newly developed hybrid atmospheric processors to any world facing environmental crisis, regardless of Alliance membership or political standing. The Assembly erupted in discussion as representatives from other worlds began to speak up. To everyone's surprise, the Zentari delegation, known for their staunch support of Alliance protocols, stood in support of the proposal. The Zentari Collective has analyzed the data from Navoria, their representative announced. The efficiency of the human-Navorian hybrid technology exceeds anything in our archives. It would be illogical to reject such advancement based on procedural concerns. One by one, other delegations rose to express support. The momentum was building towards something unprecedented, a fundamental shift in how the galactic community responded to crisis. High Chancellor Vexmore, sensing the changing tide, made a strategic adjustment. The Alliance welcomes this spirited debate. I propose the formation of a special committee to formalize the structure of this humanitarian corps, with equal representation from Earth, Navoria, and the Alliance Council. It wasn't everything Rice had hoped for, but it was a start, an acknowledgement that change was necessary and inevitable. As the formal proceedings concluded, Tavik led Captain Rice and her team to the Crystal Gardens, now flourishing again as the native flora responded to the cleaner atmosphere. Navorian families strolled through the pathways. Children ran without breathing apparatus, and the distinctive harmonies of traditional Navorian music filled the air for the first time in years. Your people know how to celebrate, Rice observed, watching a group of young Navorians perform a traditional dance among the glowing crystal formations. We celebrate life, Tavik replied, something we would have lost without Earth's intervention. Dr. Chen approached, accompanied by Chief Scientist Mox and a group of human and Navorian researchers. Ambassador, Captain, Chen said, barely containing his excitement. We've completed the final analysis of the hybrid processors. The technology is even more adaptable than we thought. With minor modifications, it could address atmospheric issues on at least 37 known worlds. Mox's 4 eyes blinked in rapid sequence, and the crystalline matrix seems to develop a form of memory. It becomes more efficient over time, learning from the specific contaminants it processes. A self-improving environmental restoration system, Rais mused. No wonder the Alliance is suddenly so interested in cooperation. Speaking of cooperation, Commander Jackson said, approaching with a data tablet, we've received messages from 22 Earth vessels that have diverted to Navorian space. Apparently, word of our mission has inspired quite a movement back home. They're bringing additional supplies, volunteer specialists, and requests for cultural exchange programs. Cultural exchange, Tavik asked. Seems humans are fascinated by your people, Jackson explained with a smile. Artists, musicians, historians, they all want to learn from a civilization that predates our own by millennia. Governor Silara joined them, accompanied by Elder Counselor Vin. And many Navorians wish to learn about Earth, she added. Your adaptability, your unconventional approaches to problems, these are qualities our people have grown to admire. As they spoke, a commotion near the garden entrance drew their attention. A group of Navorian children had surrounded several human engineers, pressing small glowing crystals into their hands, traditional symbols of eternal friendship in Navorian culture. They'd been making those for days, Governor Silara explained. Every child in Luminar wanted to give something to their human saviors. Captain Rice watched the scene, visibly moved. We didn't come here expecting recognition, she said quietly. No, Elder Vin agreed, his ancient voice carrying the wisdom of centuries. You came simply to help. That is why this moment marks more than the saving of one world. It marks the beginning of a new way forward for all worlds. As night fell fully over Luminar City, the celebration continued under the clear light of the twin moons. In the Grand Plaza, a joint performance of human and Navorian musicians created harmonies never before heard, the rhythmic drums and string instruments of Earth blending with the crystalline resonators unique to Navoria. Captain Rice found a quiet moment to stand with Ambassador Tavik on a balcony overlooking the festivities. The Alliance will try to control the narrative, she said, watching the diplomatic vessels in orbit through the now clear atmosphere. They'll claim they always intended to help, that they were just being thorough in their deliberations. Let them, Tavik replied with surprising calm. History will record the truth, that when the stars abandoned us, humanity alone answered our call. Not alone anymore, Rice corrected, gesturing to the ships from other worlds that had begun arriving after Earth's example. Your salvation has sparked something greater than either of us anticipated. Below them, the celebration had spread throughout the city as Navorians embraced their human saviors and the promise of a future they had nearly lost. Children who weeks ago had been confined to sealed habitats now ran freely through streets bathed in moonlight. Elders who had prepared for death now made plans for renewal. In the sky above, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the heavens, visible only because the atmosphere had been cleared by the unprecedented cooperation between two species who, until recently, had been strangers.